Hello, David. How are you? Hello,
Good evening,
Joanna.
Bill. Can
Hello,
you hear me?
Juana. Yes, yes. And can you hear me?
Let me turn you up. Okay. Try that again. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you
Okay, good, good.
hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hello? Hello, Patrick. How are you?
Hey, Bill.
How are you?
Okay, I'm just still trying to get the thing set up.
Okay. Are you done grading papers and
Yeah,
exams?
I thought I was. They like to
You
wait
thought you were.
too late. I heard a doorbell.
Uh,
Hello, Yasmin. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you doing?
Good. What is UCC?
Oh, that's the organization I work for. I must have had a previous work event earlier, so I like to label it.
Yeah, sure. But what does that stand for?
Oh, it's United Community Centers.
Okay.
It's an organization in Brooklyn that I work for.
Okay. Very good. And what do you do then?
Um, I I oversee the programming at the center. So we have a number of programs, some related to early learning, urban agriculture, and sexual health and education.
Okay, very good. Sounds like very commendable work that you do.
Thank you, thank you. And I apologize for being off screen. I'm also making dinner, so I hope that's all right.
That's quite all right.
Okay, good.
But where is Deb?
I don't know. She's often a little late.
Yeah. Hello, Whitney.
Hi, how are you?
Very good. Hello, Mithu and Roz. How are you? And now Deb is joining us. Okay, very good.
Here we are. Hello, hello, hello.
Yeah.
Let me
So
just
we've
get
got
back to
10
middle
people.
here a little bit. What a crazy day. My goodness. Who do we have so far? You and David. Hey, David.
10 people.
Okay, that's
We have
great.
10 people.
Okay. And everybody
Hi, good
is
evening, everyone.
looking well.
Good
Hello.
evening.
Who's speaking? Is that Joanna?
Juana Penson. Hi, Deborah. How are you?
Good, good, good. Nice to see you.
Likewise.
Yeah, thanks for coming. We're
Thank you.
trying to, spread the word on this one.
Yeah,
Get
I
more
did also. I
people
did
into the
share it.
room.
Did share it already.
Okay. Juana,
Good, thank you.
what organization? I know more than one.
More than one. Yeah.
Yeah, but
I'm a membership coordinator for the Food and Shelter Coalition. I also serve on the board for the Jersey City Theater Center. I'm also a committee member for the Food Task Force. And I'm just a community advocate on my own.
Yeah,
Wow.
I think
I
I
had,
met you at the Triangle Park Community Center through Monica Shaw.
yeah, I
believe
had
that's
you bucketed under food pantry, but I know
right, 'cause
that,
mostly food insecurity that I do advocacy for.
yeah,
That's
your
very good
tentacles,
work.
yes. And Joanna Wood. We have few enough people just to say hello around the horn. We usually get started at about 5 after, so we have a couple of minutes to say hello to everyone. Patrick, how are you? I believe your wife runs the repair cafe, doesn't she?
Talking to me, no.
No, you're not that Patrick.
There's
Okay.
no wife.
That's fine.
That's
And
okay.
we do have a number of people who are now joining. So Panos, that's a surprise. You're a pretty busy guy. Thank you so much for leaning in.
Well, thank you, Deborah. I mean, I was wanted to find out is about at 7 o'clock is the time. I just finished my last Zoom, so glad I can join.
Okay. It's the
We're
case,
happy to have you.
Panos, that what we're trying to do is connect the dots with Rutgers and SJC and some of what we're doing on the ground here, including working with Bill Armbruster, who's the co-host this evening. He is the chair of the Green Committee for the Journal Square Community Association, which he helped to start, and it's one of the finest neighborhood groups in Jersey City. So the genesis of this evening, this monthly talk, came out of my wanting to partner with Bill because he was running some good meetings. Folks were chasing us down to reconstitute the good meetings we used to run. So we've partnered up on this. These meetings usually run an hour and a half, depending on Q&A, but we do it all year long, monthly on the third Wednesday evenings, but we take off in July and August. Panos, we were going to catch up with you on email. We were going to try to look at those Department of Health reports and see if the research you were doing could help us drill down a little bit here in Jersey City. And that could be another conversation. So, Patrick, I'm sorry I mistook you and your wife. I am looking for the folks that I met who run the Repair Cafe at Grace Church. If anybody knows who that is. Hello, Roz. Hello, Yasmin. And Joanna Wood. I think we should get started, Bill, when you feel the time is
Yes,
right.
yes.
You like to pull the
Yes.
trigger.
So,
Before
yeah,
you
sure.
do that,
So-
Bill, a quick question for Deborah. Give me a context for your for your repair cafe question. I know people that are interested in that.
Yeah, there was a couple that moved here this past year from another place. I can't recall, but she was doing, the gentleman who I spoke with, whose name I don't have in front of me, wanted to volunteer with SJC. And we started to talk, and he wanted to set up a call with his wife, who was starting to run a repair cafe here in Jersey City. And we hadn't
Okay.
had that go on here before. And I want to support it. So I will find those people, but there's one going on here, and other people are interested in that stuff. So I'm just trying to connect the dots.
Yeah,
Okay.
So
Keep me
Deb,
rooted.
I'm sure you know Reverend Laurie Worm. She's the pastor there at Grace Van Vorst, and
Do
she
you
would
think you could
certainly know
find
more
out
than
who
you.
that is, Bill? Do you know her?
I can ask her. Yeah,
Hey,
sure.
That would be awesome.
I know Elizabeth. Elizabeth runs the Repair Cafe. Sorry, this is Elena. I can make an
Oh,
email
hi.
introduction.
Would you do that, Elena? That would be great. What is Elizabeth's
Sure.
last name? You know?
Knight,
As
as in Scarlet Knights.
Scarlet Knights, as in Nights.
Yeah. Night like medieval, not like nighttime. Yeah.
So KN.
Yes,
KN.
KN.
IGHT. Okay, that's great.
Yeah, and do I have your email, Deb?
debitaliano@gmail.com. I'll put it
Okay.
in the chat.
Okay, great. Thanks so much.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm happy to make an email
All
intro.
right. So,
Okay, so welcome everybody. What I'd love to do is just to introduce the speaker tonight, who happens to be a board member for Sustainable Jersey City, David Larrabee, who just briefly, and his bio was in the link in terms of the discussion topic description. When you guys registered, you know that he is a physicist. He can tell you a little bit more than I will about his background and some of the work that has him being one of the leads in our certificate program around environmental and eco-justice. He is very informed. He also leads the emissions and emissions reduction module in our certificate program. Again, now mentioning that twice. It's an annual program. It's our 10th year anniversary coming up. We do this every year, 10 consecutive weeks between March and May on a Tuesday evening, to give people, in the past it was 30 hours of training and education about topics and systems thinking, emissions and emissions reduction, environmental justice, eco-justice, basically what goes on with sustainability in practice and urban ecology and waste streams. So it's a wonderful course. We'll talk more about this at the end. But David has his hand on a lot of stuff. He's taken on even some independent research lately. And I want you to talk a little bit more about your background, David, and hand it over to you.
Okay. Boy, I'll try to keep this short then. I got involved with environmental justice issues in 1973. I was a young freshman at Cornell and a physics major, and I went into the college chaplain's office and found out that they were doing a huge thing on environmental, ecological, and economic and environmental issues, really centering around distributive justice and social justice issues. And I was hooked. I've been hooked ever since. My original intent was to go to theological seminary, but the churches at that time had no interest well, I should say limited interest in environmental justice issues. So I joked, like all good undergraduates, when faced with a big problem, I delayed the inevitable and just stayed on for a PhD in physics. Fast forward, I worked in national lab, I've worked in industry. Industry kept promoting me, and every promotion I left less. They tried to convince me by sending me to MBA school, which I enjoyed, but it convinced me that I didn't want to be in management. So I went back to academia and taught for 20 years. And as I got enough seniority, I could determine my own schedule. I could determine a lot of my classes. So I started to talk more about the relationship between science, technology, ethics around social issues. And of course, at that point, climate change was one of them, as well as several others. I ended up going to theological seminaries and getting a Master of Arts in Systematic Theology. And I've been doing independent research in eco-justice, specializing around energy issues for a while. And a lot of that work has been around looking at how our policies affect less developed countries, indigenous peoples, people within a country that are struggling, really the social justice aspects of our energy policy. So that's it in a nutshell.
that's a phenomenal background that you have.
Yeah.
Quite a combination. I don't know many people have studied both physics and theology.
I'm a member of the American Scientific Affiliation, which is a sort of a Christian science religion organization, and you'd be surprised at the number of people that have strong science and an interest in theology and in more the ethical and moral side of science.
Okay.
I'm not saying we have a lot of voice, but the interest is there.
That's a great lead in, the ethics and morality around science as we now unpack this wallet hub conversation. I know.
Yeah, so I'm going to share my screen in a second, but what I would like to do this evening, and some of where we go is up to you. I'd like to talk a little bit about the Wallet Hub and get into issues that surround what has now been dubbed greenwashing. But to do that, we have to do a little bit of background information. And I'm going to do a little bit of a comparison, or I'd like to do a little bit of comparison to show some of the issues between Jersey City and Gary, Indiana, which if any finance people out there is in the news indirectly because it's the home of major factory of U.S. Steel, which Nippon is thinking about trying to take over. And then I want to talk about the concept of net zero. So that's the kind of thing that I'd see where we're going tonight. Let me share my screen.
Are you good there? You have the
Yeah,
ability to do that?
I'm trying to.
Okay.
That's should be there. Whiteboard screen. Cell data should be downloaded. Show all windows. There's why. Oh. I'm sorry. The problem is on my end. So hold on a second.
I was just going to say.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to close some of this. Okay, don't need that. Don't really need that. Let's try again. Okay, sorry about this.
Oh, that's okay. So I see Mitu, you're here also. We were just talking about this morning that we have to get people from the Community Green Committee, these CGC meetings, over to Green Drinks, which are our social events we do each quarter. Mitu and I were talking about how do we sort of do a better job of letting people know what's going on when. So Mitu is our events management lead for this stuff, and we just had a beautiful event. I kind of liked, Bill, that it was intimate. I think there were about 30 people there.
Yeah, it was really good.
On the plaza there at Journal Square as a holiday green drinks celebration. We had some nice jazz music. We were working with the Municipal Aid Society to do a year-end give back drive. And, you know, we had a couple of sponsors stop by. The whole of it was very nice. We generally offer the first drink for free on us just to get you in the room. That seems to entice people, but it is, after all, a free event. On this past occasion, we asked people to bring a donation for the Give Back Drive. We play sustainability trivia. We give prizes out. We all have kind of a nice time and go home having learned something new, and hopefully having met a couple of new people that are of like mind. We do that 4 times a year: March, June, September, and December. So stay tuned for an announcement for our next one, which will be in early March. And do we have X in the room by any chance?
Yes, we do.
Okay. David, do you need 5 more?
Nope,
Do you have 5 more minutes, or you're good?
I'm good.
Okay. So X will circle back to you at the end of David's talk.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you.
So can you see the screen, and is it big enough?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
great. So let me.
We're seeing all the slides. Can you get rid of the slides on the side and just use the screen?
I hope so.
There you go.
All right. So again, the outline, I want to talk a little bit about the Wallet Hub article that has started a dialogue going within SJC. Talk a little bit about the global background, some key dates and ideas. Then I'm going to talk about carbon accounting, because a lot of the issues come around in how we do the accounting. And I want to end up with talking a little bit about the concept of net zero and how it's led to a fair amount of what I'll call greenwashing. So, Wallet Hub. It was an article that's posted. What it intended, it tried to rank the 100 largest cities for their greenness. I don't know whether that's a word or not, but I'll use it with 1 is the best, and 100 the worst. They considered 4 areas. Jersey City's overall ranking was 76. In college, I guess that'd be a failing score if 1 is A. In the environmental area, there were 9 different criteria they used, and our ranking was 92, pretty good. Transportation, there were 10 areas, and the ranking was 6. Energy sources, there were 3 areas, the ranking was 99. And they called lifestyle and policy area, there were 6 areas, and ranking was 38. The article also said that Jersey City tied with 5 other cities as #1 in emissions per capita. And that's the source. So that in a nutshell is the article. One of the interesting things was that the attention was given to that tied for #1 in emissions per capita and not on an overall relatively poor score of 76 in terms of the overall ranking. So you guess you could say if you've seen the movie Don't Look Up, sort of a misdirection to overall score.
Yes.
So it's interesting. It's interesting that that went to the positive and not looked at the area, the 4 areas. So I want to talk a little bit about what they did. So in terms of looking at it, if this was a report handed me by a student, they would have gotten a failing grade for lack of citing their sources adequately. By that, I mean, they can say, well, I got the data from these half dozen sites, but that's not really a site. You'd have to say where particular, it's EPA is not a site. EPA, this section, this website, this data accessed on a date is a site. As a consequence, I really can't tell you how the emissions were calculated. And there's many possibilities. I'd like to talk about that later. But in thinking about it, one of the issues is, I'll bet that if you came up with your own list of what makes a city green, and you assigned rankings to it in a particular order, you could probably make that list in pretty much any order you wanted to, depending upon what you cited. So for instance, income is not in their list, and that's an important factor. Living space is not in their list, and the environmental justice issues really aren't in the list at all. And I would argue that all those things have a role to play when you're talking about a green space. If the living space is really small, then you're really talking about an impoverished community. And somehow a green community that's hopelessly impoverished is not my idea of a sustainable city. Recycling and landfill was left out. They didn't mention it, but they basically said, we didn't have any good data, so we're not considering it. Tree canopy was not included, although urban heat island effect was. Truck traffic seems to be left out, which again goes to the emission stuff that SJC has been working on. And it's not clear in the report who counts as a commuter. So if somebody that works in Pennsylvania drives through New Jersey on their way to New York, do their emissions count within Jersey City? And it's an interesting question is whether you should do that. So perhaps the lesson from this, did I put this slide? Yeah. On a positive side, it really raises the interesting question about what makes a city green. And that's a worthwhile conversation to have, but I wouldn't be necessarily wedded to their list of what the criteria are. I mean, it's just their sort of opinion. Because of that, the ranking depends on the person doing the ranking. It's not an inherent. What do they leave out and why? How are the weights determined? is that I went out and gathered what data I could and sort of made a toss salad out of them because I could get that data. And maybe you left out things that the data is not there, but are terribly important. But this buys into our society's desire to reduce everything to one number. And I would say that sometimes you can't reduce things to one number. You just can't. That oversimplifies things to the point of being wrong. Okay. I said this before, the emphasizing the greenhouse gas emissions per capita over the overall ranking is sort of a don't look up behavior. I don't want to look at the bad stuff, so I'll give you something that's good. And that's kind of in the line of sort of the greenwashing I would talk about. And I'll say right off, I'm not sure I believe that we're number one in emissions per capita. So what do we mean by emissions per capita is another question that I will attempt to address a little bit as we go on. So this is sort of what led to the discussion that we've been having and while we're here. So let me stop here for a moment and say, are there any questions? I find it hard to follow concepts while I'm talking on things, so. Okay.
David, I will point out, I spoke a couple weeks ago with Barka Patel, the city's director of the Department of Infrastructure, and I mentioned that we were going to be having you at this meeting at the topic and, you know, Jersey City's rank. And she said, yeah, we were not pleased with that survey because the city has come up very well in some other rankings from Wallet Hub. And I didn't go into any details with her, but Deb, you know, I think we're hoping to have Barka join us at some point in the next few months, maybe when we have the consultant who spoke on ESIP to us a few months ago come back and maybe
You mean
ask
Dan
Barka to join us.
you mean Dan from the city or Greg from the school district?
The guy from the city, you know.
Okay, that's Dan Riggle.
Dan.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, and
but-
invite Barka to join us, and then we could just ask her for her comments on this study.
But
I just wanted to interject that.
yeah, but I'm gonna make the same comment. You know, if I think about colleges, right? The reports come up and rank colleges. But what that leaves out is that the student knows the discipline they want to go into or has a specific interest. That ranking may be of no value to them. So I'll do it here. So, I'm gonna wait for this. I'll do the other one. So Gary, let me talk a little bit about Gary and Jersey City because it illustrates this point well. Gary in Indiana has a major steel manufacturing plant in its middle. It is smaller. It's smaller population than Jersey City. Jersey City is about 300,000. Gary in Indiana is about 70,000. It's bigger, physically bigger than Jersey City. Jersey City is about 21 square miles. Gary, Indiana is about 50 square miles. We are bound by rivers. They're on a lake up in northern part of Indiana. Jersey City has no heavy industry. You know, you don't look out and see smokestack. Gary, Indiana is home of U.S. Steel, or has one of the biggest U.S. steel processing plant in the country is in Gary, Indiana. Okay. The CO2 emissions for Jersey City are something, well, the 1916 value that was quoted in one of the Jersey City's report is 11.1 megatons of CO2 equivalent per capita, per person. And Gary, Indiana is 165, almost 166 megatons per person, or well over 10 times the amount. But 92% of that is due to the industry. Okay. The income in Jersey City, household income on average, is about $76,400. Gary, Indiana is $31,000. Now we're going to find that a higher income generally means a higher consumption, which generally means a carbon footprint is larger. Okay. So let's assume that so somebody buys a product in Jersey City whose steel comes from the plant made in Gary, Indiana. Okay. The way we compute, so who is charged with that carbon dioxide emission? Well, the way we've been doing accounting here and the way we do accounting in what's called territorial accounting, the people in Gary, Indiana get charged with it. So we say, oh, they're terrible. You know, they have this really high, 10 times the CO2 emissions per capita of Jersey City. But 90 some odd % of that emissions is actually buried in the products that they're exporting that the rest of the country buys. So there's an inherent unfairness in using this kind of drawing a boundary around something and looking at the emissions that comes from only the emissions that come from within that boundary. Go ahead, Ash. You're muted.
I thought I clicked on it, didn't. One point I wanted to make on this footprint idea, is that when you count footprints, you have to do an input-output analysis. It has to count imports and exports as well.
Yep.
We count China's greenhouse gas emissions to be more than ours. But if you look at it, almost everything that is exported from China comes to America. We exported our manufacturing to them. Why should they have to pay for the carbon emissions? There are carbon emissions. If they were being manufactured in America, we'd be stuck with them.
Right.
I'd stop.
No. So we can think of the first category we have here is that you can talk about emissions within an area. Okay. And you can talk about emissions in terms of the footprint. How much carbon or greenhouse gas emissions are you responsible for as a result of your lifestyle? And you can do that for cities. That's a far more difficult question to answer. So before we get into some of the details, we want to talk a little bit sort of the greenwashing. Let's go over some of the up-to-date information on what's happening. Because some of what is going out there is a little crazy. Okay. So greenhouse gases are primarily due to some form of energy use. So I want to talk about the globe because the globe is what's the greenhouse gases are in. So this is the world energy consumption versus time. Okay. And you can see the total here, and it continues to rise for a bunch of reasons. One of which is that less developed countries are trying to develop, and to do that requires energy. Another part of reason is countries are trying to grow their GDP. We hear this in the U.S. a lot. If you actually said that maybe we shouldn't be growing our gross national product, maybe what we should be looking at is the distribution of the gross national product, not size, you're not going to get elected. Okay. And you can see, so this is the total energy. And the red line is the amount that's due to fossil fuels. Now, this little dip is COVID. And you can see that fossil fuels is continue to be consumed. The renewables, which includes hydro, is this little green line here, and nuclear is flat here. So on a global scale, renewables are still a very small percentage of our total energy consumption. They're rising, but very slowly. This is the global CO2 emissions. Again, from about 1960 to 2022, which just came out. And I fit a straight line to it. And you'll hear a lot of talk about how we seem to be flattening off because we're looking at just this data. But I'm going to point out that a number of years ago, the climate change deniers were claiming the world was cooling because they didn't take the big view. They only used a little bit of data at the end. And now those of us that are concerned about climate change are attempting to do exactly the same problem. Is this going to come down? It might. But given the data we have at the moment, you can't say that on any kind of statistical basis yet. You'll hear a lot of people saying it has to come down in the next couple of years. Maybe. This is COVID. You'll notice before COVID, the slope was matching the increase, and they seem to be back to that. So it's something to keep an eye on, but it's certainly not definite that we're going to peak in emissions in the next couple of years. Not from the data anyway. Of course, what's really important in some sense is the CO2 in the atmosphere. This is from just maybe a week ago. This is a graph of the CO2 in the atmosphere versus time back to when the record started, which was about 1959 when Keating did it. This safe level here at 350 is generally considered a level at which you're probably not risking very much at all in terms of climate change and issues. You're certainly not risking too much in the way of tipping points, etc. And you can see we're well beyond that. And you can also see that this looks like it might have been going up like that. So we maybe have gone from some exponential growth to sort of a linear growth. But all the efforts we've had, the 28 years of the UN COPs, have not resulted in this slowing down, which, given that slide, is not surprising. Okay, if emissions are continuing to rise and not falling, we expect that to continue to rise. Okay, so that's the status of things.
And just to have it be that folks are understanding what this is, there was a question here, X. Are
Okay.
you speaking about these last few slides about why this data wasn't compared to what came out of DEP, or were you referring to something else?
No, this is the background that we find ourselves in when we're talking about the reason we're interested in emissions per capita is because greenhouse gases are driving global warming, and that we would like to have less of them so that the world's temperature rise is less. Actually, what we'd like to have is that this curve at least flatten out. So, and everybody contributes to this, right? I mean, even if the US somehow magically had zero emissions and the rest of the world didn't, it'll make a difference, but it won't solve the problem. This is something that everyone in the world has to address. And because we have such a, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. There are people that are going to be needing some form of liquid fuels, especially in the less developed world, because that's how we developed. And we'll talk to the justice issues in a second. So I just wanted to get some background so people aren't going away thinking that we've got this addressed. We don't.
So is that good for now, X? Understanding where David was coming from for this as a backgrounder?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, so when you hear from COP that we made great progress and everything's going great, I go, 28 years of effort, and I don't see much of a difference. So one of the concepts that has come out that has not made the press a lot is the concept of a carbon budget. And that fails at very low ends of carbon in the atmosphere and very high levels, but in the range we're talking about, it's a perfectly good concept. And what that says is that if you want to limit temperature rise to, say, 1.5 degrees C, then there's only so much carbon dioxide, greenhouse gas, if you wish, that you can throw into the atmosphere. And it's not a rate, it's a total. Okay, so you throw in 1 trillion tons of carbon and you get a certain temperature rise. You throw in 1.5 trillion tons of carbon, you get another temperature rise. And we're doing this so fast that it doesn't much matter about the timing. Okay, so this is the carbon budget as a pie chart for having us about a 50% chance for a 1.5 degree C carbon temperature rise. Starting at 2024, this is actually pretty conservative. There are others would say that my 8.5 years is more like 5 or 6. And this is what's happened. So over the history from the early days of the Industrial Revolution to the present, land use change has used 26% of that budget. The United States greenhouse gas emissions have already used up 15% of that budget. China's emissions from that time has used up 9% of that budget. The 27 EU countries have used up 10% of that budget. United Kingdom 3%, Japan 2%, India 1%. Bunker is no one is willing to take the carbon emissions from jets that fly from country to country or from ships that go from country to country. So that's put in its own budget. And 1% of it has been used up in that kind of international travel. And everybody else on the planet has contributed 18%. And 14% of it remains. And this is for 50%. So if you want like an 87% chance that you don't get over 1.5, that remaining budget shrinks to about a third of its size. Okay. And like I said, at the current rate, somewhere between 5 and 8 years, that remaining budget will go to 0. Another thing that's confusing about this is people are now will talk about 1.5 degrees C, not in the immediate future, but in 2100. And they'll base that on trying to suck carbon out of the atmosphere to make up. This is called overshoot. And in point of fact, if you just held the carbon dioxide greenhouse gas level constant in the atmosphere, the ocean would continue to heat up for quite a while. So we talk about the final temperature, the equilibrium temperature, not the temperature tomorrow or over the next couple of years. So you see, when people say we don't have much room left, they really mean it. There's not a lot left. Or another way to put it, it's highly unlikely that we'll limit the temperature rise to 1.5 degrees C. Because we're not going to solve this problem in even 16 years. So one of the things we talk about the current emissions. How much is emissions this year? And if you look at it that way, there's you get the things that says China is the biggest emitter. Well, yeah, you draw a box around China and you count all the emissions coming out of that box and a box around the United States and EU. This is what you get. You're ignoring population. You're ignoring exports and imports. It's just literally a box around the country, saying anything that comes out of the country. So if I import something from China, and China gets the raw materials, say, from Congo or somewhere around the world, the emissions in the mining are in the country that was mined. It goes to China. China processes it. China pays for those emissions. It gets shipped to the U.S. The emissions from that go in this bunkers category, and it lands on our shore. And the only emissions that are charged to us are basically the truck to take it from the dock to our house. And so in reality, what we've done, if you think of it the reverse way, we're exporting our carbon footprint into China and the other countries. EU is doing the same thing. And you see, India, which everybody's worried about with the coal plant, is 7%. I mean, that's big, but it's, it's half the size of the USA, even though there's a lot more people there. Okay. But there's another way of looking at this. Since the carbon in the atmosphere, the emission rate is high, the question is who put it there? Who's responsible for putting that carbon in the greenhouse gas in the atmosphere, for starters? And if I look at it that way, I get a bit different picture. So I'm going to add up all the emissions in the United States. Now, this is not land use change. This is just direct greenhouse gases. Okay. About a quarter of all that carbon dioxide and the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere is due to the United States. We're the biggest one. We own it. China owns about 14% of it. The European Union owns about 17% of it. United Kingdom 4%, Japan 4%, India 3% of it. International slush fund that no one will take is the 3% of it. Canada is 2%, and ironically, Ukraine 2%. And everybody else in the world is 27%. Okay. So if I was a less developed country and I was looking at this, I would say to the US, it's your problem, not mine. I contributed some minor amount. You contributed 24%. How dare you tell me that I can't develop? I have to have a problem developing my country because I can't use fossil fuels. Or you insist on giving me a loan so I have to buy solar cells from China or from you and hire your experts to maintain them and have sort of a technological colonialism. So this is a very
Well,
different.
Go ahead. I can understand the developing countries saying that, but it is their problem, especially so many of the small island states in the Pacific and countries like Bangladesh and the Maldives Islands are in severe danger. And the injustice of it is that countries that did the least to create the problem are the ones most in danger of suffering from it.
Right. And what's the comment is that for them to adapt, they're going to have to use some of the energy to build the alternative energy, build hospitals and things like that. And that's going to require some fossil fuels in this world. And if you deny that to them, you're basically saying, we've used it all up and you have to suffer. And there's a big injustice in doing that. And so this is where you get in the COP meetings, where you get the asking for funds so they can develop in a way. And in COP, they had the damage, loss and damage fund, which is just to cover the disasters that are facing them. The U.S. contributed, what was it, $17 million? Some ridiculously small amount of money. Yeah. So there's a perspective of who put it there and how fast is it going in, and you get different answers, or really a different perspective in looking at it. Yeah. Okay. So any questions on this much? Yeah. This is the U.S. emissions, not what's been happening over time. And you can see that in fact, our emissions have been falling. And you can see that a lot of the emissions are the electrical power industry. A little tiny bit here in transportation. Not a lot. Industry has been falling slowly. One, you're exporting your industry, but two, industry has a vested interest in being energy efficient because when they consume energy, it costs money, and they have the resources to really examine ways of making themselves more efficient. And you see the bottom of things like agriculture, commercial, residential. These are relatively small and relatively flat. Okay. And I'll say that a lot of the trend here in making the electric power industry more efficient come from a couple of items. One is the shift away from coal, which is terribly inefficient. And coal plants are now usually replaced by natural gas plants, which are more efficient. And in fact, the technology has come to make the natural gas plants even yet more efficient. Okay. This is not a result of renewable energy, which is still a relatively small percentage of what the US is doing. Okay. So we still have a long ways to go. If you follow this forward, it's great that we've done this far, but we have a lot of work to do. Okay. So I did this earlier. The issue with the territorial emissions. So another issue in India, and I'm going to do 2 slides on this. The comparison with the two is one of income. So this is a plot that looks at the per capita emissions within a country and their gross domestic product. Does everybody here know what a gross domestic product is? It's in the news a lot. It's sort of the dollar value of everything a country makes or has a financial exchange about.
Including bad stuff.
Yeah, right. So, I put the example I use is I have a little pharmaceutical and I produce a drug that turns out to kill people. The sale of that drug is positive to GDP. When the bodies go to the funeral hauler, that raises GDP. All of those transactions actually raise GDP. So one of the problems.
So that's misleading.
Yeah, but our entire economic system is based that GDP has to grow. Right? When GDP doesn't grow, we call it a recession. So it's not enough politically, it's not enough for GDP to flat. It's politically, it has to grow. And that's why a lot of people are calling that we really need to rethink how we do economics. GDP doesn't take into account the distribution of that wealth or income as well. So if you have a millionaire that gets a lot better off and a couple other people that get worse off, but overall the amount of money increases, GDP grows. But you can
So
see.
is there a relationship between this discussion and the Wallet Hub survey looking at GDP per capita? Again, that per capita comes up all the time.
Well, the relation to Wallet Hub is that when you ask for when you simply say emissions, right? You look at emissions per capita. So if I were to cut everybody's income in Jersey City in half, okay, their consumption would drop. And at least in some sense, the emissions per capita would drop. You would stuff more people in smaller apartments that would use less energy. So the income, if I'm going to compare emissions per capita between 2 places, one of the things that you have to normalize out is what is the income difference? You have a big apartment complex with really small apartments with a lot of low-income people in it that's well insulated. It does not have the same emissions as the same number of people in a luxury apartment. So, and you don't, right? I mean, you want a city that's livable. And so income matters.
Yeah, it's also the case and we talked about this too, David, if you do nothing else to make the city greener, but you just grow the population.
Right.
Right. We are ranked higher on the green scale.
Yep.
By doing nothing, but growing the population. So Jersey City has become rather crowded in some areas. It's very congested in a good part of this city.
Right.
For a variety of reasons, call it traffic or people.
Right.
And it is suggested because of aspects like, some transportation opportunities here, the public transit system, the light rail, et cetera. As we pour more people into Jersey City, it just gets greener and greener. It's very misleading. Ridiculous.
This is the same thing for the US. Ventical just mean in 20s. So each of these is the next 5% by income. And this is an estimated US, the emission share of the emissions. There's a lot of, having gone through how they create this, there's a fair number of issues that are very difficult to resolve. Okay, this is not an easy thing, but I think that the overall idea of this certainly holds up. And so this is the Stockholm Environmental Institute is suggesting that if you earned in the US in 2023 187,000 or more, you're in you're in this percentile, and you can see that you have a disproportionately higher emissions per capita than, say, even somebody that's 135, and then it sort of drops down. There's another way of saying that higher incomes generally mean a higher carbon footprint, but that won't necessarily get included in this territorial understanding of emissions, right? Because some of those emissions from the higher income people are buying things that are manufactured outside the city. Okay, and so other people pay on the territorial basis. Those emissions are assigned to somebody else. Interestingly enough, in a lot of these, agriculture is not included. So the food that you buy, the emissions that are associated with that are charged to the farmer and to the trucker that brings it in, and not to you that are buying it in the store. So getting it accurate, what I would argue really what you want is the emission footprint in Jersey City, not the emissions that are in the boundary. But that is a very, very tough number to nail down with any certainty. Okay, any questions? I go on. I said I'll talk about greenwashing. So there's lots of definitions, but I'll say it's not telling the truth or the whole truth in order to appear more environment friendly than you actually are. This can be from an oil company talking about green fuel, meaning that they are using solar cells to run their gas pumping stations rather than burning gas to do it. So they're calling that now green, and that is actually happening.
Can you say that again, David?
Well, if you have say you have a pumping station that's pumping out gas, okay, and you're in a place where the solar energy is fairly cheap, it's actually it's actually more cost effective to run it off solar panels than it is to pipe in the electricity. And so they'll say, well, we're greening our gasoline manufacturer because I've pumping oil out using solar energy rather than electrical energy or burning a generator. That's a form of greenwashing, for instance. Do I have that here? Yes. Here's a governmental form of greenwashing going into, we are, the US now especially is saying that we're doing everything we can to help climate. Well, this is the US fuel production of crude oil over the last couple of years. And before we went into COP28, we set an all-time record for the US pumping oil out of the ground.
We were doing well.
Yeah, then we discovered that
Just 20 years ago.
Yeah, we discovered we could put carbon dioxide into the oil well and increase the oil throughput, and that's what happened.
Meaning we created additional emissions to increase the production.
Well, we've taken things and we put down into we have both horizontal drilling, and I'm not sure when that came into effect, but we have learned how to get more oil out of old oil rigs, and this is the history. So we are now We are now pumping oil like it's going out of style.
And Deborah, you have to remember, technology changes.
Yep.
Deepwater Horizon was impossible 20 years back.
Yep.
And now we have deepwater drilling. Fracking is the same thing. We've known it since 1950.
Yeah,
Fracking has existed as a technology since 1950. The only reason it was not used is because it wasn't economical until Dick Cheney said, exempt them from all
Yeah.
the clean air, clean water rules.
so
Then
there
it
is
became
no,
cheap.
David, everything that you've pointed out here, there is no offset against this chart.
No. And I'm going to talk about, I want to close off with the comments of offsets, because that is like nails on a blackboard to me. I also make the comment that now that those of you that had history class where they talked about the search for the Northern Passage in the early days to get a ship, well, the good/bad news is it's now possible, because the Arctic ice has decreased enough that in the summers you can do that. And now that the Arctic ice is lessening, we are now going to be drilling into the Arctic. And if we don't do it, the Russians will. So we're going to be mining the Arctic, the oils in the Arctic.
Oh, Lord.
So, this shows no sign of, there's, yeah.
No abatement. Okay.
A local example, New Jersey's claim that we have no coal-fired electrical plants. That's true, but we're also a net importer of electricity, and the place is supplying is Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania does. Now, in all fairness, I was looking at the New Jersey accounting, and this is one example where they did in fact account for some of the emissions from the importing of electricity. So they at least did that right. So let's talk about net zero, because I think this is the biggest greenwashing scheme going on right now. We used to talk about emissions, now we're talking about net zero emissions. Now, the IPC, the organization that does the technical reports for the UN, is very clear about what they mean by net zero. And this is their quote: reduce anthropomorphic human emissions as low as possible first. Step one, use technology to take the emitted greenhouse gases out of the air, carbon capture. The carbon capture is to be roughly simultaneous with the emissions. In other words, what you put in the air this year, you remove from the air this year. Not you remove from the air over the next 50 years, or 100 years, or 150 years, but you remove from the air this year. So if I plant a tree, that tree will remove carbon over the course of, say, 150 years or so. If I take 150 years worth of carbon that's removing and apply it against to my emissions this year, that's not net zero. The other problem with something like planting a tree is that you have to store this forever. You say, not forever, what's forever? 800 million years. Because in 800 million, no, this is another reason, but something else, carbon dioxide doesn't go away. Either that or someday you're going to have to pump it out of the ground and do something with it. Or the danger that it leaks out of the ground over that period of time and then goes right back in the atmosphere for carbon capture. But your forest that you're planting can burn down. The tree will eventually die. You try to put it into a house, the house will ultimately be disassembled or put in a landfill, but that will be released. So the IPCC, the scientists were very clear on what they mean. And it has been run with, meaning that we'll just offset it. And that's not what it means. But you will find even in some environmental activist groups will use it as if I can somehow emit a couple of tons of carbon into the atmosphere and plant a tree and be done with it. And the answer to that is no. And there's good technical reasons for that, why you just can't do that. That won't work. So yeah, I can imagine for somebody like me that's data driven, when you hear everyone talks about net zero, like I said, it's like figures on a chalkboard. There was a report, and I don't remember. I can try to find the report of the reference if you're interested, that tried to go through and sum up all the deforestation, land use changes, offsets that all the countries had promised, and came to the conclusion there's simply not enough land to do it.
There's simply not enough what?
Land. There's only so much land on this planet, and there's we've used most of it. You know.
So you're talking about tree planting?
Yep.
Okay, there are other forms of offsets though, when you say?
Not like what?
I don't know. But I don't always think about it in terms of trees. I'm thinking about it in terms of other forms of either carbon capture or processing carbon. I'm not up on the latest technologies, but I thought
Very
that some
little,
of this was-
very little. A lot of it is shell games.
The
Well,
carbon,
Offsets are a shell game.
that's to know.
so carbon capture is when you suck it out of the air or out of a smokestack, is you have storage issues, but the IPC would say that's legit. Okay. Some of the excess carbon will go into the ocean naturally, but of course, when you do that, the ocean gets more acidic, which is going to create is already creating some issues. We're starting to see the issues in the ocean from that. There are proposals to see the ocean to get the process going where the ocean absorbs it faster. But there's really, and one of the things that IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, was trying to get at was if I could get to a position where there was no, in any given year, he said, or course of a couple of years, there was no net greenhouse gases going to the atmosphere. Okay, so I can get to that point. Then what might happen is that the Earth does have a cycle to start absorbing some of that CO2, and you can allow that to take over, and then slowly the CO2 will decay, not over a couple of years, but over time. And what they're now talking about is that there's pretty much admit that the temperature is going to rise above 1.5. And they're calling for a massive program to suck carbon out of the atmosphere to bring the carbon dioxide back to a level that we can return to 1.5. And the reason they want to do that, if it stays above 1.5 long enough, you start endangering passing some tripping points. Go ahead, Dash.
So just point of order, we're at 8:05. I just want to know how long you're going. I have no problems going all night, but I want 2 minutes at the end to counter what you're saying.
So we're needing, this usually goes between 8 and 8:30. We want to leave some Q&A,
That's fine.
and I'd also like to introduce the speaker from next month. So David, where are you at?
Let's take questions here. I've covered the major points I wanted to cover.
Okay, so we hit on greenwashing and offsets, which you said you wanted to close with.
Yeah.
So you're good? Okay.
I'm good.
So do folks have some questions here? Bill, you were looking forward to this. Any questions?
David,
Yeah.
carbon capture. You know, in principle, it sounds great, but as I understand it, and maybe this was what Ash was just touching on, but technologically, it's extremely difficult. Am I not right about that?
There's been no, to my knowledge, well, I have to back off. There are very few carbon capture programs that have been actually tried that are economically feasible. There's one I've heard of where that looks but it's not scalable. I mean, there's some things that you can do locally. But for the most part, no, there's not been, people have tried it, they've dropped out of it. It's been a financial disaster for the most part, and we're hanging our hat on it.
Yeah. That's
Is
a
it
shame.
technically doable? Yeah. I mean, but on a pilot plant. But why not just not, if you're going to use the solar energy and wind energy to capture the carbon, why not just use it to offset the carbon in the first place?
Yes.
Yeah.
So how many people in the audience are feeling really depressed at this point? No, seriously.
You know,
I
Hey.
had this problem in class a lot. Okay. I tell students the magnitude of the problem realistically, and they're absolutely done. They have nowhere to go. How are we going to deal with this? It can't be done. However, as I realized in my last session in class this semester, there are two factors that we're not quite taking into account. One of them is what you all are familiar with the expression ceteris paribus, all other things being equal, right? It's an assumption that economists often make, and it's a bad assumption when they make it. It's also a bad assumption when we make it on negative projections. What we don't recognize consistently across the board is that Darwin was right. There is an evolutionary process at play. As David was saying about drilling oil, the technology changed. It changed against our interests by pulling out more oil, but it's as possible that it can change in the other direction. I'll give you an example of that in a second. So one thing is that evolution does in fact happen. What David has painted is a very, very realistic picture today. This is what you see if you look at the world with eyes wide open. My problem as a professor is I really dread giving students hope. They need hope, otherwise you get paralyzed. But if I give them hope, they become indifferent. Oh, it'll get taken care of. I show them a technology that's promising, and maybe 15, 20 years from now it'll show up. Oh, then we don't have to worry about it. The problem is, if we don't worry about it, then we really will be in trouble.
Yeah.
So I'll stop after one point that I want to make. There's a video that turned out by PBS Nova. I'm putting it in the chat. That I showed in class. It's all technologies that are in development for net zero, right? They're all experimental kinds of things. We've had a lot of experimental stuff for nuclear, modular nuclear that you bury in the ground, small units that you use them for neighborhoods. All this stuff has been done, as David said, at a small scale. Bringing it to scale is the problem. I would suggest you watch this documentary, but with one break on your mind. Don't assume that they can solve the problem. They can't. None of these things are going to solve the problem, because there's the fellow that invented ecological footprint, William Rees. He and I have had long discussions about this. He's sure that climate change is a symptom, not the problem. The problem is that we're far, far overshooting the carrying capacity of the planet. We use too much stuff. We can do all the stuff we like with climate change. It's not really going to move the needle until we start using less stuff. I'll stop there.
Yeah, I'm echo what you said, Ash. I mean, but I'm going to add to it a bit. I think one of the lessons that we need to take away from this is that we can't assume that we're going to solve climate change. We're not. We're already seeing the effects. But what we can do is start talking about adaptation. So when Jersey City, I'll bring to Jersey City, starts talking about what they're going to do to prepare for another hurricane. And I suggested that, you know, in the long run, 100, 150 years, the lower part of Jersey City is going to be probably be uninhabitable. But we have time. So how do we plan to migrate to something else that's greener, more effective, and how do we do the adaptation? Or are you going to fill it in? Probably not. So I mean, I think if we take this view, we can say, all right, how do we do our planning and whatnot, anticipating that, yeah, we're going to do everything we can to bring to not have the temperature increase, to minimize it, but recognize that climate change is already here. And
Yes.
and how do we transition to the next level? And maybe that is a moratorium in building in downtown Jersey City.
Maybe that's what, a building moratorium?
Moratorium and saying that you're not going to build new stuff down Jersey City because ultimately that's the wrong place to put it.
Yeah.
But we can't do that if we're not taking a reasonable look at what the likelihood is over the next 50 to 75 years. Positive side, it is a chance to build something much better. Jersey City suffers because it's an old city. You can only make incremental changes in an old city, right?
Well, they're
Are there
they're
newer cities?
reinventing, yeah, they're reinventing the sewer system for one. That was supposed to be a Band-Aid approach, but it's really, they're undertaking many, 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 many hundreds of millions of dollars in repairs to that, in theory, in preparation for climate change, more frequent and harsher rain events, that kind of thing. So we were just starting to look like Hoboken. We still have areas of the city that are severely flooded by some of these storm events. And they've expanded what they were doing to rebuild the infrastructure underground, but by far that's not going to save us.
Nope.
Well, besides that, Deborah, think about this. We're a CSO city.
Yeah.
Everything goes into one pipe.
No, that's what I'm saying. They're not,
Yeah.
they're separating
Right.
these pipes now. Anything
Oh,
new,
yeah.
yeah, anything new that's being developed is not part of that same pipe system at all, but they are going through the motions of actually separating a lot of stuff. And that was the expanded iteration of the project, because that was not at first what was going to happen.
I sympathize with Ash, you know, and the dilemma you face with your students. You don't want to get them totally depressed. You want to give them some hope, but you know, then there is the risk of them just becoming indifferent. Well, somebody will come up with a solution, and I think maybe the middle ground is to say we're facing a very bleak future, but there is still hope that if we do everything possible, you know, and including the old mantra, recycle, reuse, and reduce, which goes to your idea of we've just got to use less stuff, period. But also, you know, hoping that some kind of technological moonshot will come along. And I don't know what kind of resources are being poured into things like fusion energy. I've read, and I'm no expert on this, but I've read that could be a fantastic solution, but so far little has happened as I understand it. And you know,
Yeah, it is a fantastic
Ash,
solution. That is the right word to use. But seriously, watch this documentary, PBS Nova, Chasing Carbon Zero. They talk about 7 or 8 technologies which have been tested. They're not fusion, right? They're coming out with stuff like batteries that work with rust, right? Iron air batteries. They've done this in the lab. So it's possible that things will change. Not easy.
So I would also add, both Ash and Bill, that we in the U.S., in English speaking, often treat hope as a noun. And I'm going to argue, think of it as a verb. And a verb that requires a direct object. What are you hoping for? And then the solution to hope is action.
Right.
What you're hoping is for something to happen. Well, get off your posterior head and start working on it.
Yes. Yes.
But is this used as I don't have hope? What do you mean by that? You know, it's not a book or something. At best, maybe it's an emotion, but emotions often follow action. So, you know, my comment is it's a verb. Use it as a verb with the direct object, and
I have a sign above my door in college that says very simply, hope is not a tactic.
yes,
It's not
right.
going to solve anything. You need it, but it's not going to solve anything.
Right. Right. Good point.
So do we, just in sort of winding down here a little bit, because I'd like to introduce X before we peel off here, but are there other people in the room that have some questions that potentially, and they don't have to be specifically on what any of David's slides represented, but you have some experts in the room here, at least some professors who have some perspectives, some of which we do have a lot of discussion about in our certificate program, which, is another way to come up the learning curve a little bit. Sometimes this is a little bit confusing. It's a complicated topic. This is probably emissions and emissions reduction, understanding this, one of the topics that most confused the public and our students. But again, if it's interesting to you to learn more about this, and I'm just going to quickly screen share here what would look like. And I just pulled up that video, Ash. Thank you very much. I will be watching that. But this is what,
Yes.
what is coming up. This is SJC's 10th year anniversary for our certificate program in sustainability. I mentioned we do this every year. From this year, it's kicking off March 12th through May 14th on consecutive Tuesday evenings for a couple of hours. Each evening, we'll discuss, these topics: sustainability and systems thinking, setting up the conversation, a lot of where Ash is coming from and David can wrap your mind around a better way to start to think about this stuff: environmental justice and eco-justice, emissions, causes, reduction opportunities, different perspectives from different categories of science and economics and policy, etc. We also get into sustainability in practice, and we look at best practices, what other cities are doing, and how we can do better here. And then waste streams from a socioeconomic set of perspectives. So one aspect of this last topic, which is the new emerging circular economy, is something really potentially transformative. But again, to learn more about this, tune into, and we'll be making this announcement in January after the holidays. I'm going to stop sharing here, and I want to introduce X. Thank you for being patient, X. She's going to be our speaker in January. So X is the new environmental justice organizer on the ground from Clean Water Action for Jersey City. And she does work in other cities, but we're claiming her first. And she uncovered some of the, very disturbing news of late. We have a company in Jersey City that is, emitting toxic chemicals into the air. Their permit is up for review. X put us on to understanding, that we're in the danger zone of what's going on with this company, and we're about to do a mini campaign working with Clean Water Action to alert the public around this and, frankly, get a petition signed and push back on the permit renewal. So X, why don't you say a few things here? We are publishing, a little bit about this story and the petition in our newsletter that's coming out early next week or maybe even over the weekend. But why don't you talk a little bit about who you are and tease people a little bit that you're coming back in January to do a talk.
Yes, thank you for that introduction, Deb. Hello, everyone. Like Deb said, I'm the new environmental justice organizer for Clean Water. My background, I majored in community and justice studies and African American studies, but before that, I was organizing in high school. I started organizing when I was 14, so this is kind of like, I guess the area that I've always known I wanted to go into, which is why I'm so passionate. I just graduated in May and I started at Clean Water in June. Yes, and this is my first campaign and I'm really excited to show you guys some parts of it. Deb, I can share my screen, right?
Yes, you can.
Okay, awesome.
Don't show them too much. We want them to come back in January.
No problem. So can you guys see this? It says sign our petition.
Yes,
Awesome.
yes.
So yeah, I gathered a bunch of materials related to this facility, I believe in Ward E of Jersey City. The facility is called the Diversified Global Graphics Group, and it's a paper company that's located in Jersey City. The reason why their permit has been published is because they have a Title V air permit, which basically means that they're a major source of volatile organic compounds and hazardous air pollutants, VOCs and HAPs. The problem is with this renewal in general, one, the community hasn't necessarily been involved, but also two, their track record just isn't necessarily, I guess, good in terms of how they relate to the community. So one, they have over 20 violations from the DEP, and a lot of them include consistently going over emissions, submitting emissions reports late so that the DEP can't in real time see how much they're emitting, and installing equipment without an operating permit. So this becomes a problem in a city like Jersey City, where one, they have poor health outcomes and also lower life chances. And they also have one of the highest rates of adult asthma. And that doesn't make it better that DG3 is located next to Liberty State Park. I believe the East Ward or the East entrance, and there's a summer program that goes there every year. Yeah, so I'll show you.
Camp Liberty is located next door to this, if you can imagine.
Yes.
So
Yeah,
what would be good is, and you can give them a preview. Did you put the petition in? Great. Okay. You know,
yes,
so
that
there's a big story to unpack here, right? And we don't want to do all of that now. The teaser is that we have a problem in River City, right? And there's something that people could do. Yeah, and there's something that people could do to get involved, certainly be more informed, get behind this petition, come out if we need you to.
Yes.
Right.
And with that, I would just say there are two things that can really like come out of this from, moving forward from this meeting. You can publish or you can send public comments to the person they outsource to take comments on behalf of the facility. Christian Witt from Compliance Place International, he's accepting comments on behalf of DG3 until
Where is the link for that?
That
is it in the petition?
Yeah, it should be in the petition.
Okay, so people can just click on the petition link and there is some guidance there around how to make a difference, right?
Yeah. And here is the email if you guys need it. Yeah, you can submit public comments. Signing the petition would also help, but just being on alert that the community. I actually just had a conversation with the council president of Jersey City earlier in the day, Joyce Waterman, and she is totally open to the idea of sharing this with the rest of the council, and it is on James Solomon's radar, and I'm fairly sure, depending on zoning, I think he's the councilman of the ward that this facility is in. So
yes, and it's borderline because I'm also literally, my street was cut in half between Ward E and Ward F,
Mhm.
So James was my council person. Now Frank Gilmore is, but I'm in earshot, if you will, of this, as is a number of folks who are in the environmental justice corridor. It's a 6-minute drive from this facility into the heart of our environmental justice corridor.
Yeah.
And, you know, the winds do blow here in Jersey City, right?
Mhm.
As a
Yeah.
river city, we have crosswinds. This is just not okay. So, I guess what we want to say is that in January, to tune in further to learn a bit more about this, X is going to unpack this, right? Because even though the public comment period ends on February 4th, that's not the end of this story.
Yes, yes, because we're
This
definitely
is
pushing
just
for.
beginning.
Yeah, they already had their
Troublemaker
public
that you
meeting.
are.
Mm-hmm.
So that,
Yeah,
that
we'll get
January
it then.
meeting, that January meeting will be 4 weeks from today, Wednesday, January 17th, 7 p.m. So same time, same channel. And
Yes.
Good deal.
Yes, I'm very excited. Thank you so much.
Is that all right for a quick spotlight
Yes, for
on this
sure.
for now?
Thank you. Yes.
so Deb, you might want to add something, but I just want to thank his presentation tonight. Very informative, maybe also depressing, and Ash for your comments, and X for the preview you gave us, and my thanks to everyone, and my wishes to all for Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Holidays, and for a better 2024, a greener, cleaner 24. And Deb, do you want to
Yeah,
add anything?
well said. Let's just lean into good things, you know, in the new year, leaning forward.
Yep. Okay.
All right, everyone, enjoy.
All right.
Thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you all.
It was
David,
nice
all
meeting
right.
you
special thanks to
all.
you.
Walkie-talkie,
Happy
thanks,
holidays,
David.
folks.
Thank you.
I
Thank you
know.
for having me.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.